Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I know that a lot's happened since the last time we saw you, and it's a new year, a lot of world events and holidays and all that good stuff, and so kind of dusting off those cobwebs and getting back into the process and really thinking about this is a really good thing. So we appreciate you plugging in and being here, and are looking forward to having a good night tonight. And I hope everybody got a copy of the printout that we sent out. And there's probably a lot of information there that may not make sense at the moment. Some of it's pretty self-explanatory, but we'll walk through that and kind of talk through that a little bit and answer any questions as we move through. So looking at the agenda for tonight, we want to again kind of revisit the norms for our long range facility planning process, and just kind of it's always a good idea just to revisit that at the beginning of every meeting, and just remind ourselves of kind of some of those agreements that we made to one another. We'll also look at summary of needs. We've had throughout the process, kind of a trickling in, if you will, of information as it relates to the facility assessments that were done before we came on board, on down to the educational adequacy, and also the enrollment and the capacity for each site. So we wanted to really kind of put a bow around that and talk about that as a summation and kind of an observation there. After we do that, we'll roll into some basic budget modeling, kind of budget modeling 101, if you will. And Richard will so eloquently talk about that because he's so much better at that than I am. And just how it relates to kind of our past experience, recent experience, close by experience, but also just what ODE, the Oregon, the Department of Education is seeing as kind of cost per square foot and what's happening really statewide. And then we're going to look at some simple budget scenario planning, kind of, again, district-wide. And none of these scenarios have really been vetted, but they're just kind of, let's get the dialogue going and getting an understanding of just some real rudimentary costs and thoughts behind that. And we'll get into more detail there. If there are scenarios that we have not envisioned or have not encaptured kind of in that brainstorm, let's talk about that and maybe capture some of those. But what we really would like to walk away with today, at the end of the day today, is a prioritization of those scenarios. So it's really important that we do that so that we can further the work along and honor your time and your commitment and make sure that we're doing the good work that needs to be done for the district. And then of course we'll wrap up and get an understanding of, hey, what did we learn today? Scott, not to put you on the spot, but if you had a couple words you wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone and welcome. And I think the first thing I wanted to say is that, this is one of the meetings that I look forward to the most. And I think that the reason is I just so appreciate the level of engagement, the enthusiasm, and the different viewpoints, and also been very entertained with the emails that have been going around also. And I really mean that in all seriousness. I really am honored to be here, and I really feel that the community has owned this process on how they want their facilities and schools to look like in the future. And we're going to share a lot of information with you tonight. I think, as Jonah said, the goal is to sort of narrow it down into several scenarios that we can start to focus on. So it'll be a lot of information tonight, and then hopefully in our following meetings, we can really get down into deep discussions about what it is that we have in front of us. And just wanted to give just a gentle, friendly reminder that just in the spirit of inclusiveness and making sure everybody's views are heard and everybody's in the loop, it would probably be a good idea to to keep running the communication through Jonah, just to make sure that, side conversations and people are being kept in the loop, and just remembering that this is a board committee, and we do need to adhere to public meeting laws and all of that. So just a friendly reminder, and again, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate that. Again, just going back to the norms, and I know we've talked about this before, so you probably could recite these in your sleep. But just as we move through tonight, being respectful of everybody's ideas and thoughts and questions, but really being, not being bashful about participating and providing your input as well. I thought, honestly, some of the really great engagement we got last time was when we went around at the end and kind of got everybody's perspective on, temperature check, where are we in the process. And, I like hearing that feedback. If it's great feedback, it's all really good feedback. So I really appreciate people being very candid with their comments and thoughtful about that. There are no bad ideas. Meetings start on time. Remember, we're ambassadors for this long range facility planning process. So we're hoping that during this, we're providing you with good information as we move through that. And as we kind of lay this foundation, we'll start really exploring what these scenarios look like. Be open-minded and think outside the box. And then just that consensus decision making is really important. And that inclusivity that Scott had alluded to, I cannot stress that enough, how vitally important that is. And so if we are talking outside of the group, I think it's important that the entire group is included in that conversation, just because I want to make sure that we're honoring everybody in the group and that we're all kind of hearing the same message. Be a good listener. Obviously keep the needs of the students first, and we're an advisory group. The final decisions when we make a recommendation to the school board will be made by the school board. But we are a very, very important advisory group through this process. The consensus decision making, again, it's about honoring everybody's input through this process, working together as a board committee, so everyone on the committee understands how these decisions were made and why. And then just really honoring the foundational work that's been done to date. It's always good to question and kind of, and ask questions about that work, but at some level, it is foundational. And I think just getting that veracity is really important. So we want to continue to do that. And we'll continue with our parking lot for ideas. If we come to an impasse and are having a hard time moving forward, we'll capture that in kind of that parking lot of ideas as we move forward in the process. When we can't come to an agreement and we do have an impasse, again, if we can maybe have a show of hands on something that we want to sort of break the deadlock, that would be good. And I think, we want to kind of address maybe some, and we'll get more into some of the questions that have arisen since our last meeting. And one of those questions is, how far are we looking out with the long range facility planning process? Obviously, we're looking to the future. We want to future proof your facilities and your needs and all of that. But if I'm to be more precise on the mandate by ODE and what we're doing and looking to accomplish, it's a 10-year plan. Is if we haven't communicated that well before, my apologies. But that's kind of the foundation, and any good long range plan will continue to get updated on either a yearly or bi-yearly basis, and just be foundational for that decision making. So if I haven't been clear about that, again, my apologies, but it is a 10-year plan for a long range facility plan. Again, going back to some of that foundational work that's really important is those guiding principles that were developed in the second long-range facility planning meeting, to protect our community's investments in all of Silver Falls schools, to provide a safe and high-quality learning environment for all students in all the buildings, And then obviously to spend our tax dollars wisely as possible, so that the investments are sound and they have a long life. Again, the summary of needs district-wide, some of this and maybe all of this and to most of you may seem a little bit redundant, but I think it's really important for us to look at that and just kind of put a bow around it and really get an understanding of, from the empirical data, where are the observable needs in the district. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to what direction we're going, but it's important for us to understand what the data is telling us as we move forward. To that end, some of that foundational work was those enrollment projections done by PSU several years ago. And I had the privilege of watching your boundary work earlier this month, and kind of had a good listen of what Rob had to say and what Jason had to say as it related to both the PSU enrollment projections, but also the housing analysis and that 20-year plan for the city of Silverton. And just kind of some of my key takeaways. There's a lot of them, but these are sort of high level. And not to put you on the spot, Jason, but if you wanted to add anything to this, please feel free when I walk through this. But there's really kind of a projected growth in Silverton of approximately 2% per year, with give or take 50 new residences being added a year. And those residents will obviously, there'll be a mix of different project types, different housing types. Um, the enrollment projections align fairly well with the anticipated growth in Silverton. If you recall back in our meeting, I think it was maybe our fourth or fifth long range facility planning meeting, there was a question that was brought up on how does this really align with Silverton, and is it coinciding with kind of what they're seeing in the city limits. And so I think, again, if you haven't seen that portion, I'd encourage you to go online and take a look at that. Um, and that projected growth is really kind of dispersed throughout the city of Silverton. So it's really sort of all over the city. Obviously, there's more concentrated areas than others, and I think that sort of captures the essence, at least in my mind, of what I've learned from that. Jason or Steve or anybody want to add to that at all? Or did I capture that right? Any thoughts there?
And that's a good summary of that. The housing needs analysis essentially projects about 1,100 new dwellings being needed over the 20-year planning period, with kind of the strategies for that to provide more of a mixture of different housing types than the predominantly single-family detached dwellings that we've seen. So the city's working on developing those code standards and criteria to not increase the amount of dwellings over that projected 1,100, but create more of a mixture and a blend that's more reflective of the demographic and income needs based on the current kind of and projected demographics of Silverton.
Great. Appreciate that, Jason. And again, Jason goes into a lot of detail in that video. So if you haven't seen that'd be good thing to look at and review. So getting into just kind of those needs district-wide, again, we've touched on all this, but we wanted to really kind of encapsulate it in a few diagrams. We look at really three big factors when it comes to assessing needs. Those are capacity and enrollment, the educational adequacy, and then the facility assessment. This first one really talks about the projected enrollment at the K-8 and elementary school sites. And really a simple way to look at these graphics, and I'm sure everybody's already realized this, is kind of red is the highest need and yellow is the less of the need or status quo there. So just again, in a very graphic way, just kind of seeing that and seeing what that might look like. And taking a look at that there. The needs at the elementary school K-8 that we saw based on that enrollment projections is at Central Howell. And why is that? It's really because Central Howell has, a lot of, has more portables there, and the students aren't being housed within the school itself. You'll see that out at the middle school as well, and at Silvercrest. Really, that's kind of the rationale for that. You could see there that it doesn't really, or I'm sorry, Victor Point, there. It doesn't really. It's not terrible at the Victor Point, but there is a need for an additional classroom here in the near future. Um, as we move to the next one, you can kind of see here at the middle school site, and again, that projected enrollment based on the PSU study, that kind of ebbs and flows, but typically goes about that 2% per year, and then the capacity at 350 students, just again in the building itself. The portables accommodate everything else, but there is a need for students there. Um, the high school, there's a lot of room to grow in the high schools, the way that we saw it based on that analysis. And whether or not 1625 is I know there's a little bit of discretion as to, is it closer to 16, or, but there is room for growth there at the high school. From a capacity standpoint, not high on the priority list there. When we move into the facility needs, and again, this is that really good work that BBL Architects had done with Lauren, and I know Tom was part of that, and some other select members of this committee were probably part of that. But this really kind of gives a sense for the needs in the district. And so how do these colors really correspond with how we saw it? There was a suggestion at the last long range facility planning meeting that we look at the needs on a cost per student basis. And to be quite candid, I've never looked at it from that perspective, but it actually makes a lot of sense, I think, because the schools just they're from the gambit of 3 classrooms on all the way up to the high school, and it's really hard to sort of assess what has the most needs based on just the cost there, because they're really kind of all over the place, right? But if you take that and you divide it by the enrollment, it gives you a sense for that. And you can see that a lot of these schools, again, based on that work done by BBL, a lot of those schools are fairly comparable. They're in the 30s, the 30,000s here per student for just repair. And again, this is just repair. 35, 45 is a little bit higher at Evergreen. And then you see that at Butte Creek is at 27. Scotts Mills is at 37. Victor Point's at 16. Silvercrest is at 30, 31. Let's see here. And when you look at it at the high school level, or I'm sorry, the middle school level, it's significantly higher. It's 64,000. And again, just on the facility needs themselves. That's not replacement. That's not educational adequacy or looking at, reconfiguration or any of that. That's just the needs of the facility itself. And so that really gets up in the kind of the red category, if you will. At the high school, not so much. And a big reflection of that is it's a newer school. It's your newest property. It's larger, so naturally it's just, there's going to be more distribution per student, and so those needs per student is lower there. So kind of a real easy, kind of way of maybe looking at it and sort of trying to digest from a facility needs standpoint what that looks like. From an educational adequacy standpoint, and that work that we did earlier, those needs were a little bit different there. And actually that one does not look like the right slide there. I will go back and circle back on that one because I did not get the right slide in there. But at the middle school here, we have an educational adequacy of 3.6 with a building average score of 0.4. So again, that kind of falls lower in that educational adequacy score analysis. And I'm going to actually pull this up here just really quick. I swear I actually look at these and check them again before they go out. Somehow that one slipped through the cracks. So my apologies there. So at the elementary school K-8, you'll see here in a second kind of what those. Oh, that's weird. That one did not come in as I'd hoped. That anyways, I'll share that with you here in a minute. But at the high school, you can see again the educational needs here. We're about 7.5 and a 0.9 there. And if you look at a summary of this, and again, I'll share that information with you if we want to look at the more detail in the educational adequacy of the elementary and K-8. This really is the diagram to look at when it takes and encapsulates all of that information, and it kind of gives a summation, if you will, of the needs district-wide using empirical data. And that's really what it's about. So you can see here Mark Twain from a capacity standpoint, not too bad, actually really good. Facility needs is orange, educational adequacy is orange. Again, Silverton Middle School is really the only one that falls within that high priority needs category if you aggregate all that information. So that really is the highest need. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here, but in the district, based on that data there. The high school, not so bad. That's in the yellow, but the ones that come hot on the heels of Silverton Middle School is Robert Frost Elementary, using that data there. That's kind of in the mid priority needs there. And then Central Howe, which again is in that mid priority needs there. Everything else from a capacity standpoint, from an educational adequacy standpoint, and from a facility needs standpoint, based on facility needs per student, is lower on that sort of priority list. Again, this is just based on data. It's not based on maybe perception or how we see the needs moving forward. So I see I have a lot of chat comments here, and I apologize I haven't looked at that just yet, but I want to kind of take a look here to see if there's anything we wanted to address or answer there. So just kind of let's pause on this here for a minute. And I just want to open it up if there's any questions or thoughts. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well enough, or did I breeze through too quickly? I mean, from a need standpoint, what's everybody think about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So for the capacity, are you looking at just the building capacity and then last year's enrollment? Or are you taking into consideration the PSU projections?
The PSU projections there, as far as the needs in the end in 2027, basically. So if you see kind of a yellow or an orange on capacity, there's a projected need there either now or in the future.
Okay.
Back a few slides, one of the early slides, Central Howell showed an increase just in the number of students of about 100. And so is there some demographic thing going on in that area of the county that would indicate or allow for that kind of an increase?
That one there, that's a good question there, Ray. That is, let me just double check that one here real quick. $84, $291. Let's see here. So we got okay, 184 now, And then the PSU projection, let me just make sure I've got the information right there. Actually, no, that should be 188 for that 2027 projection. So it's pretty comparable there. So I've got a couple things I want to clarify there, and I will send this out with an updated kind of numbers there.
Okay.
But that should be 188.
Yeah, thank you.
and
Can I ask one more? And Scott could maybe answer this. What is the within, anyway, what is approximately the total enrollment in the district in 2019? And then what would the projection be for the total in 2027? If these numbers were just added up, I guess that's my question.
I'm sorry, Ray, could you repeat that question again?
Oh, okay. At all these numbers, it would be helpful to just know the total enrollment for 2019 and then what the total enrollment is for 2027 to see if that's like a 2% number or increase or change or what that happens to be.
Just overall district-wide, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll get that information to you based on that.
Jonah, one thing I would say on that too is that they learned in the K-5 meeting is don't use this year's enrollment because the numbers are so skewed. Use the previous year, the previous 2 years average maybe, because this year just doesn't work.
Right. Because of COVID. Yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify about Central Howell. It says capacity is 138 and enrollment is 184. Is that because of modulars?
The modulars.
There's not such a discrepancy on the other schools.
Could you clarify that comment, Tom?
It says Central Howell capacity of the building is 138 students and 2019 enrollment is 184. And it's my understanding that Victor Point is the one that's really beyond its actual capacity, not Central Howell. So I was wondering if 138 was supposed to be 188.
Yeah, I think Jonah, when he was talking about that slide, it's because if they do have modulars, the capacity is decreased from the 138 is based on the actual building capacity, not including the modulars. And then the enrollment numbers are from the 2019-20 year, so it is the more standard number that we would be used to seeing. So including the charter schools, our district, Ray, has just under 4,000 normally. This year we are down about 10%, under 3,600. Because of the COVID situation. So the numbers that he has here are based on 1920.
Okay. So I'll make that revision to Central Howell and get that updated and make sure that that's correct and get this information out to everybody, just so we can again have that and kind of have some discussion related to that. But again, what we're seeing based on the data is Silverton Middle School is the highest needs. Robert Frost in Central Howell would come in kind of sort of second, if you will. And then everything else is in that lower priority based on that data there.
So one other question, as far as educational adequacy, I'm curious what the definition of that is. It's like Evergreen, I understand, as like a lot, it doesn't have a gym. I don't think it has a music room. I can't remember what it's missing, but a lot of the older buildings are lacking in some specific element like that.
And that's a great question, Tom. It's based on all of it, to be honest. It's based on 40 different data points, and based on us interviewing all of the teachers, administrators, and principals at each site, with the exception of the high school because it's just too big. We had to work with department heads there, and based on all of that empirical data, and we've shared that kind of at our last couple meetings, and what that looked like and how that number came to be. That's what it's based on. So it encapsulates classrooms, and encapsulates science, CTE, PE, everything that would be needed for kind of in a good educational model, if you will. So the last two meetings that we've had, where we kind of broke it up into two that probably seemed very long and tedious, that was the summation of that. So and I want to make sure that everybody has a copy of that and kind of can go through that as well. But that's really what that is there. So in this diagram really is responding, I think, to we've had comments kind of in past meetings, just asking like, well, what about educational adequacy? What about facility needs? How does that all? This is really trying to honor those really good questions that we were asked of us, and really kind of pull it together and really see what those needs are from that standpoint there. So that's kind of that, and we can always come back and talk about that a little bit more there, but I'd like to kind of move us along here real quick. So looking at district-wide budget modeling, and how do we get some of those numbers there? I'd like to turn it over to Richard and kind of give a sense for that budget modeling there.
So good evening, everybody. Budget modeling is very, very important to this overall process, because everybody wants to know, well, how much is it going to cost, and why does it cost so much, and how do you come up with the numbers? And we're going to explain to you the structure that ODE prescribes for the process. But we hope you'll find it useful in kind of making decisions as we move along, because we use that as the basis of budget development. There's a key word to this. It's a budget. There's not enough information to do a cost estimate. There's not enough information. And I think you're going to see an illustration of that, because in this portion of the presentation, we do have some comparative analysis to other schools that have been built in Oregon based on their costs per square foot. So bear with us a little bit, but those are real costs of really designed projects. So everything in a budget model starts with square footage. All we can estimate right now, outside of the assessment, is square footage. Even the assessment is based on how much square footage of, so for instance, flooring. How much flooring needs to be replaced in a school? Well, it's all based on the percentage, and there's a unit price for replacing flooring. So we're going to start with the square footage analysis of your most challenging school in terms of what's in, what's out, what do you use, and that is the middle school. So this is a very simple analysis that on which we're going to build. So what we started with is, how many square feet of usable space at the middle school do you have if the enrollment was 500 students? Now, I very carefully said at the school. I mean at the site. I mean all of it. So we started with, what if you included all the space you use right now and included the Schlater building in it? Well, you can see it's a 111,290 square feet. That's it. That's all the space you have on that campus. And if you compare it to 500 students, That means each student is allocated, it takes up, or I beg your pardon, there's 223 gross square feet for each student. Well, that obviously is a mistake because you don't use the Schlater building. If we just take that same number and exclude the Schlater building, it drops down to 135 square feet per student. That's a big chunk of that space that we were talking about up ahead. That's a pretty good reflection, an accurate reflection of how much of that old building in its multiple phases are you using for teaching and learning. 67,290. That includes the two wings, the cafeteria and the mid-century modern building. It doesn't include the portables. The portables are important, an integral part of providing enough space for all of the students at 500. So I've given you that analysis, which is probably the most accurate depiction of how much space your school district needs for 500 students. So what we've done, we've taken the square footage on campus, excluded the Schlater building, added in the portable classrooms, and you can see it's 74,490 square feet, about 75,000 square feet. It's about 150 gross square feet per student. So the reason we go through this exercise is to clarify what we're talking about at the middle school site. So that 150 number is probably a pretty good number to start with, is how much you really knew. If you were to start all over, we would say that's about how big it's going to be, but we don't know. We haven't done a program on it. So the next step is, let's look at what we learned from the BBL assessment. So the next column is, what does it cost to repair those buildings individually? And you can see I've got it broken down into 4. The Schlater building, East Wing, West Wing, gym. So first column is the square footage. All that square footage you saw at the top, we've summed it all up there. The project budget is the next line. And that you can see, if you just, we're not advocating this, but if you just repaired everything that you have of that existing campus, excluding the portables, that's about $40 million, $39,067,000. But you say, wait a minute, that sounds like a lot of money. Well, it does. That's because that is a project budget. The construction budget is the number to the right, which is, you can see it's lower. The reason we have it shown here is this is how ODE calculates the costs. And I'm going to show you the detail on this, but there's 2 numbers you always need to keep in your vocabulary: construction cost, project budget. Because the project budget is kind of like when you buy a house and you finance it, there's a bunch of other costs that are associated with it. And we're going to show you what those look like. But in this case, you can see there's about, in 2019, if you wanted to repair Schlater building, East Wing, West Wing, and gym, it's about $28 million. But you're really going to need a bond of about $39 million to do the work. So this is what I was talking about. I started with square footage because it's a high level discussion about how much is it going to cost. We don't have a plan for these. We just want to give you a comparative analysis. Now, the state requires you to come up with a facility condition index. And in the index we talked about once before is nothing more, what is the cost for repair compared to brand new? And that's a good analysis of, if you're going to spend as much or 100% of the cost of replacement, maybe you should consider replacement. So what we've done in the bottom section is the state of Oregon has given us a cost per square foot. You see over the far right, at the Schlater building, to replace a middle school, it's $440.22 per gross square foot to replace that building. So that's the comparison it makes. Cost to repair to cost to replace. You can see based on this analysis and the ODE's projected numbers for cost to do construction, you have a project cost of $47,716,000. So there's two numbers that we're going to talk about: repair cost and replacement cost. So any questions up to this point? Well, back up one just a minute, Jonah.
Okay.
Any questions on this slide? Okay, thank you, Jonah. So the next one is, how do they figure this out? And this may be more information than you really want, but I want to give it to you because you will wake up in the night and go, wait a minute, how do you come up with that? So the repair budget, I'm giving you an example. Let's say you have projects, and this is based on the 2020 model, and I'll get to that in a moment. The 2020 model says that the repair budget, if it was $1 million, ODE says you need to inflate that by 14%. And that 14% is explained down below in kind of the footnotes of ODE inflation rate is 14% over 30 months. What they're assuming is, okay, you make a decision now, you qualify for the awesome grant, it's going to be a year before you run a bond. And then once you get run a bond and design it, it's going to be about 3 years to go the design and construction route. So halfway through that project, you need to escalate to the halfway point such that the front end escalation is offset by the back end. So over a 30-month period, they use the number of 5.6% per annum for a project starting in 2021. Remember, the project starts in 2021, but it's not going to be built until completed and occupied until 2024. So this is kind of a crazy way, but they remember the assessment is done in real time right now, and you're talking about a project somewhere in the future. Now there's a correction necessary because BBL did their assessment in 2019. In 2019, the inflation rate was 4% per month. So we need to take the BBL estimate and adjust it to 2020 numbers. We're not going to do that tonight, but that's why this number, this 5.6 per year inflation, gets updated every single year by the Oregon Department of Education. They use a national cost estimator, RLB, who's actually based here in Oregon, that do the cost per construction for the repairs. Okay. The one that,
I got you.
yeah. Or maybe I'm talking too much. Pick the, okay. The replacement value is really, really important. So ODE says, hey, you got to compare the replacement value of the school compared to its construction value to make a decision about what you should do about it. When it's a replacement, they've already built in the inflation because they give us numbers. In this case, the replacement budget for a elementary school is $370.50 per square foot. If you assume it's a 3,000 square foot building, then it's 1.1 million. I used 3,000, so we got to about this $1.1 million number. The inflation is already built into the ODE cost per square foot. So they're projecting out the 30 months to the cost of new construction. So you get to a comparison of repair cost to replacement cost. So then you can see the construction budget is not inflated. The development costs. I didn't skim over these because that's the one that everybody really tries to figure out, what are you talking about? So the 38% development costs are those elements that add on to the project cost, and I'm going to show you exactly what those are. Before we leave this, down at the bottom, I show you ODE dollars per gross square foot times school type. they modulate the cost compared to what kind of school it is. Elementary school is the least amount, middle school is the next higher amount, a K-8 school is even higher, high school is the highest, and they even include administration buildings. They do not have a replacement cost for portables because they don't expect you to do a renovation on a portable. All right, so hopefully you're asking me, okay, what are these development costs? Why is it 38%? Let's go forward 2 slides. Jonah, one more. All right, next one. So this 38% is assigned in the ODE budget worksheets. That 38% includes design fees, school district hired construction specialist. They do commissioning on the mechanical and electrical systems, primarily mechanical, heating and cooling. Envelope consultant. It is becoming a more important element to the overall design of the building from water intrusion and energy performance. You do cost estimating. The school district hires a cost estimator, third party to do cost estimating to make sure that the contractor's estimate is in line. There's a state solar energy requirement that adds to the cost. Permits and land use. When you get a permit at the city, there is a fee associated. It's not a system of development charge. It is a permit fee. Land use is a pretty intense process to make sure that the development, even though you're a school, is consistent with the development code of the city. Boundary and topo survey. Can't design a building without knowing where the property lines are and what is the topography such that you can design the grading and drainage. Geotechnical investigation is they do borings to determine the structural loading that is allowable on the soils. Typically, school districts pay with this work through bonds. The bond council and the bond sellers do get a cost for issuance of those bonds. Bond program management. You know, Lauren has a full-time job. He's not going to be able to oversee construction. So firms actually provide bond program management. And really what they do is help the school district organize. And Steve's got a full-time job too. I forgot you, Steve. Of trying to keep up where all the dollars and cents might be allocated. So you hire another firm to do that program management. Furnishing, everybody knows what that is. You're going to buy some new furnishings. And this is such a high level evaluation. They include 15% as a contingency, a budget contingency. The ODE wants to set you up for success. And so they put in a 15% contingency. That's what that 38% is that goes from a construction budget to a project budget. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. I would love to answer any questions you have. Anytime that we start doing these budgetings together, we can always revert back to this, and I will be happy to show you where in the ODE specs. And I'm going to show you another slide. There's a caveat coming. So,
question?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we're talking about that, a lot of those costs are actually sort of created in the process of establishing what we need to do to get a bond. Do we have to pass a small bond to do that, or how does that work?
Excuse me. That actually comes out of the bond that you pass to do the capital improvements.
And how often is that? Well, my recollection is that, well, I think that the high school is probably an example of this, that the actual capital improvement wound up being significantly excessive to what they originally budgeted. And is there any way of sort of projecting that so that it doesn't happen and makes people unhappy?
A great question. And yes, that is our part of my job is to counsel you well. The inflation is a factor, but ODE, their budgets, in my opinion, are not bond budgets. And in the next round, I'll show you part of it. They're just giving you a basis for a starting point. All right, thank you, Jonah, because if you look down here, this little fine print under the 2020 column, it says, these are building only costs and any site work should be added if required. I'm sorry, there's always site work required. So this is not a bond budget. This is a good illustration of what goes into a bond. So I think in addition to the 38%, the 0.38%, you should have your own contingency. So Tom, you're spot on. The best plan is to do more work upfront such that you create a bond title and a bond description that has enough funding to get your project done.
Question?
Yes, Ray.
So the 15% contingency, in your experience, is, it seems to me the items on that list are pretty standard, I would assume fairly well known, but when you start construction, you need a contingency. And so maybe you've answered this a little bit, but my question is typically most of that 15% needed for unforeseen items in the construction part?
Absolutely, Ray. And you were spot on. So the 15% built into this is just part of what Tom was referencing. We don't know what the market's going to do in a year. And so they build in a budget there for the overall project budgeting. When you go into the construction phase, that good program manager will counsel you on the kind of construction contingency you should maintain for the duration of the project to take care of those unforeseen conditions.
Yeah. I think one thing to point out here, and you probably kind of noticed this, the construction cost has accelerated pretty dramatically in the last 4 to 5 years. You could see here, fall of 2016, about $230 a square foot there for Barnes Butte. We were still kind of seeing in the 200s, 300s up to 5 years ago, but haven't seen a budget like that really since. You could see, budget's really kind of driven by a lot of things. Astoria, as an example, because of how remote Astoria is, that's adding to the premium of that cost per square foot. And that's really the information there. It's not necessarily that it's an expensive school. It's the location of it. The other thing too that's, I think, pretty critical to look at, cost per square foot for a new building is fairly predictable. I mean, I caveat that with, it's hard to know what the market's going to do sometimes. But for a new building, it's more predictable than most. In renovation, doing a renovation, you'll be hard pressed to find a good cost estimator that will not give you, it can be $200 or $600, kind of range, because it really depends on the level of renovation, the need for seismic improvements. I mean, it really ranges dramatically, and it takes a lot more investigation to really dial that in more, to get a better handle on that. So maybe a good barometer for the Schlater campus is the information that Richard had presented earlier, is probably a good place to start there. The other thing that's really hard to factor in is site development costs. Again, those really run all over the place depending upon requirements for frontage improvements on down to, just the site itself and soils and you know, a variety of items. So we'll share with you when we kind of look at some of these scenarios a budget, but that's all it is. It's really just a budget, because it can be less, it could be more, but at least it'll kind of give apples to apples when we look at different scenarios there.
So, yeah, so this chart is exactly what is a reflection of kind of, is responding to your request for what are other schools costing. And what this indicates, or first, behind every single one of these line items, there's a story. And why does it cost, it asks story, why is it 472? Well, look over in the column, it says new construction, very little bit of new construction and a lot of renovation. To Jonah's point, that 344 per renovation is pretty doggone high. So the message that we're trying to convey with this is, first, here are some representative projects. Even, you know, you look at when Mount Angel did their addition to their high school, to Kennedy High School, 284 square foot for the addition. That's a pretty good number. And then $71 a square foot for some very light interior renovation. So the other thing that we wanted to point out was that your assessment was done using the 2019 template. They've updated it. You see the elementary school costs for new construction went from 302 to 370. That's a pretty good sized jump in a year. So like I said, every year ODE comes out with a new template, and they're about to issue the new template for 2021. It's in late February, early March. So what we really are trying to do tonight is introduce you to the budget ROM. This is kind of where we are. You can see the schools that were opened this fall, those in close proximity, Heritage, Lincoln, and Nellie Muir are additions in Woodburn. 359, 343, 341. Those are pretty good values compared to the Gresham High School at 432. So these are, and then if you compare them to those 2020 numbers that ODE is giving us, they're short. It's a shortfall. It's close, but it's a little short. As Jonah pointed out, the site development costs are not in here. They are all over the place. You could be creating an entire parking lot. You could be doing street frontage on two sites. When you start putting together an actual bond budget, it is very valuable to take a few steps to kind of reach out to the city and talk to them exactly. This is what we're planning to do. Can you give us some idea of what the expectations are going to be? Gresham High School, the city came in and said, hey, we want all the overhead power routed underground. And it was a big ticket. And the school district had to go to the city and say, we can't afford, $1.5 million to put power lines underground. That's going to cut away from the square footage that we can build for the kids. So back to Ray's point, all this upfront preparation is really valuable in developing a real plan once you get down to what does the plan look like. Right now, what we'd like to do is kind of get some idea where this big idea is, and we can give you some starting points on the cost of that, and we're going to continue to work with you in developing this budget. We have a cost database that actually we update ourselves that gets down into the little nitty gritty of exactly what kind of spaces you're going to build. And so we've got a lot of tools available to us. This is that very high level, 30,000 foot. This is how much it costs. And we hope this is useful information we can always come back to. Thanks, Jonah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just to clarify on this column here, this does include site, right? For these comparatives?
No, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
And the ODE does not.
Correct. So that it may be as simple as that.
Yeah. So you can kind of see a little that if there's a question, why is this so much higher than the ODE numbers? That's part of the reason. I think, there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and this, I mean, yeah, you can, it's all over the place, the site development, even at Nellie Muir up in Woodburn, the city required a lot of site development, even some off-street development. So big budget numbers, and actually Angela's working on those projects.
Yeah.
Hey, so if you go back the first couple slides, when you're comparing renovation versus new construction, that's the exact footprint as it sits. What all is entailed in that when you're talking renovation? That's meaning we're not adding any classrooms, we're not changing any classrooms. We're basically just gutting the classrooms and updating electrical, plumbing, sheetrock, flooring. I mean, is that all you're talking? Like, so there's no change to the footprint at all?
That's a great question. The assessment is not really designed to project enrollment capacity adjustments. So yes, this is just the square foot, the footprint that you have out there today, fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very specific on it's a mechanical system. So if you look at the spreadsheet, there's like 100 entries, and it's very detailed. What kind of flooring, doors, interior, exterior, mechanical system, like it's pretty detailed, but even at that level, it's pretty high level because there's millions of components in a building.
Right. And so that's kind of my question is when you're looking at the difference in the cost, when you're talking about, I mean, we're essentially talking about, well, one of the things, I don't know if you guys know this, but like they just sent out an email that told us we're celebrating Robert Frost this week that's 50 years old. So our next newest building in this district is 50 years old. So we're essentially talking a 50-year deal here, right? And so if you're talking about renovating to get through the next 50 years versus construction, is the changes you're going to make, going to work for expansion for 15, 20 years from now, or, the changes that might come up. So is there any way to kind of look at those budgets and figure out, over time, are you going to end up making up that, 10 to $15 million you're really saving by having to do a bunch of changes in 10 to 15 years, whereas you build a 50-year building now? You know what I mean? Is there any way to kind of look at that?
There is, but what ODE is setting up is giving you a good metric of right now. What percentage is 39 million compared to 47 million? And that should be the indication of the facility conditions index. And, what is that? Well, I don't have the number in front of me, but that's got to be in the 80% range. So let me answer your question in a different way. Would you rather spend 80% of the cost of new construction to fix up what you have and you still got what you have? Or would you rather have a new building?
Well, you might be asking the wrong person. I want a new building.
I'm sorry, I assumed it was a rhetorical question.
No, that's where I think for this to work and to pass, I mean, when you just throw out that number, everybody's going to vote for 39 over 47 because, but we have to have that information when we go out to talk to the public or present this of, layout wise. I mean, like the courtyard is a dead area that really is doing nothing for you. I mean, even when we converted it over to the middle school, they walled that off. So you have a dead space courtyard you don't even go into. Stuff like that, I think needs to be discussed about, the wings and all that, and just making it most efficient for the long haul rather than just fixing what's there.
Right. And that's what the limitations are the building assessment. It doesn't change anything. You're going to spend this says the 39 million, and it will still be the same footprint. Now, could you reallocate those funds and do something there? Probably, but that's what this assessment does. It is limited to exclusively reflecting upon what you have in place.
Is there some way of getting an assessment of the original structures so that we would have so essentially if we were to do a remodel or reconstruction, my personal preference would be to do it so that functionally it was very much like a new building. And my understanding from speaking to BB&L is that these estimates are to bring the buildings up to code, but not necessarily make them more functional, which probably would involve, the basic structure, you can get it, and maybe change the layout of the classrooms and things like that. But I would anticipate it may or may not be a lot more money. I just don't know. And that's what I was kind of curious about, paralleling where Colin is going with his questions.
Yeah, and I did read your email, yes, but we're at this 30,000 feet looking down on it from Google Map, and I'm not talking literally, I'm figuratively. So if that is a decision that this group wants to do, to look at a couple scenarios, and one would be renovate, not just fix up, not just repair, renovate that middle school campus, that's a different exercise. And we could do that pretty straightforward, but we could put to it that 30,000 foot cost budget to do the things that you're talking about. And my suspicion is it's going to be higher. We need to look at seismic implications. There's other pieces that the assessment did not cover. So fair question. If that's what we want to do, we want to focus just on the middle school, we're ready. We would love to drill down on that. But we got to get to the point of, wait a minute, we got an entire school district we need to look at. So
well, speaking primarily from my own thought processes, but I feel like I've heard this from other sources as well. There's no question the middle school is an issue, and we have to address that. Trying to find the best solution involves knowing what it would actually cost to really renovate that and make it functionally like a new structure versus completely flattening it and starting from the ground over. And I feel like there's a lot of interest in knowing that actual figure so that we can actually make forward motion.
Sure, fair enough. I agree. And any number that we would throw out right now would be pure speculation on our part until we know what that looks like. And that's, again, if this committee is prepared, and I'm not asking for this at this point, but if the committee says, hey, you know what, we really want to focus on figuring out exactly what to do with the middle school, then that's what we'll come back with you on the next end, and we'll be moving parts and pieces, and we'll really do that drill down on what it is that we can do with that building. But that is going to be, I mean, you can see, I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't go into the $47 million category.
Oh, I would not be surprised.
Okay.
You're talking renovation, right?
Yeah, complete,
Yeah.
but it's not the repair. I'm using
Right.
it is semantics.
To me, I think we need to have a discussion right now of, does repair get us what we need for the long haul for spending $39 million? And I think that's the first thing. And my gut would tell me no. But then to me, you got to look at renovation on the existing site or a new one. I mean, I think some ideas were kind of thrown out there about, like, you just start over back by the bus barn and then the front part becomes something else or whatever, all those different scenarios. And then, the cost of tearing down the old one once the new one's up. And then also, if you renovate, where are you going to put these kids for 4 years?
Yeah. As a teacher in that building, that's what I'm thinking right now, is all that is being done. What's happening year after year as I'm finishing my career at that building?
And I apologize, Jackie. I want to allay your fears. We're not proposing that. I don't think that's a good idea either.
Okay.
So go ahead. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I agree with Colin in the idea that campus is quite large. There's so much space that a new constructed building, my sister-in-law, she was in a wheelchair, and she used that wheelchair. She used that elevator, which dropped her out in the rain on the bottom floor. I mean, it's totally disrespectful as, you know, somebody who has a family member in a wheelchair. You don't do that. You don't put a wheelchair access outside. That's not at all inclusive. So building a new structure, allowing us to still continue to teach in that building, it's just better for all the kids. It's better thinking, even allowing us, this old building that we're in, to think futuristically, we're probably going to need that space.
Right.
For another building in another time, way long before, you know, we're not on this earth. But, you know, we have to think pretty forward. And I think doing anything in that building to try to save it isn't good for the district.
Yeah. So my colleague is going to push us down the road to start looking at some of the things, because I agree with you. That's just not a workable solution. We wanted to give you this big idea on the budgets and give you some sense of just the magnitude of really the proposal that is before you, regardless of what we suggest. So Tom and Colin and Jackie, it is a big ticket, and it doesn't sound like the existing building with its current configuration is workable. And that's because it was kind of it's a Frankenstein. It was built, you needed more space, built, it got condemned, you built it. It's pretty typical across our state. And before Jonah steps into some scenario planning, I just want to please tell you that Gresham High School replaced 200,000 square feet and the kids never left the site. Was it great? No. They were in crappy situation or crappy classrooms for 1 year, but let's take into account the 20 years they were in a crappy building. So yeah. Before that. Anyway, thank you, Jonah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. So with all that really good information, we kind of just want to take a crack at just some rudimentary, simple scenario planning. That's something that we heard last time that we really kind of, before we start moving forward and really refining a plan or a direction, that maybe we need to look at some of those figures. So again, this comes with the caveat that these are simple math budget numbers based on ODE and some assumptions there. So they're gonna quite candidly, they're gonna range. They're gonna flex. A few $1 million here or there, and we won't really know what the final dollar amount is until we kind of refine a plan. But I'm hoping that this will give a parameter for us to kind of start assessing and maybe really thinking about and walking away with, a scenario or two for us to explore district-wide in for the next meeting, so we can show some of that progress there. So some real simple items here, so some constants. And what we'll do when we kind of pull out of this presentation is I've got a live spreadsheet, so we can run some scenarios and play with some numbers if we feel that that's something we want to do there. But wanted to give you a sense for that. Richard had mentioned earlier that those ODE numbers were from 2020, so they're getting ready to update those. And so we're putting an escalation of a year into this number just from the budgeting standpoint. Again, that 14% that Richard had talked about to the actual build date, that's already built into the ODE number. So we also want to plug in the 38% project development costs that Richard had spoken about. Now, this one's subjective. I don't know if this is the right number. And I know Piper Sandler had presented you some information before we came on board about kind of some bond scenarios on a dollar amount. And what was constant was they used $60 million. When I reached out to Piper Sandler to get clarification on that, that was just a number that they were given to look at. So So that's again, that's just a starting point. Let's just get a sense if that's the right number. We won't really know that until we come up with the plan. Now, in this biennium, you are eligible for $4 million with the awesome grant availability. That may change in the next biennium. We just don't know that just yet. But that kind of gives you a sense of where those numbers are right now. The square foot per student. So Richard had relayed to you kind of some square foot per student based on some of your existing facilities at Schlater Middle School, which was fantastic because it kind of gives you a sense for, again, how wide that range because of the utilization of some of those spaces. And, quite candidly, and no big surprise, there's a lot of spaces that are too small, not enough restrooms, not enough circulation, not, a variety of things. So these numbers bump up a little bit, cost per or square foot per student. And we really took kind of our most recent programs from comparable schools and dissected that to get these and they parallel pretty well with the national average. So about 142 for elementary, 177 for middle. If we wanted to look at the middle school without the gym, it's about 157. A K-8 is a little bit more than an elementary school, but not quite a middle school. And then also a high school is 180. If we look at those costs per square foot per ODE, that's kind of where those numbers come into play here. And that'll kind of give you a sense for how we're calculating this right now. Again, the site budget, like we said, we don't really know what the site budget is going to be until we come up with a plan and have an understanding of what we're doing. But $50 per square foot is a good kind of starting point, and all of these scenarios will use that as a constant. So it just kind of gives you a sense for that again. These numbers down here that we're looking at, again, Richard had spoke about the repair cost at those schools. And that was done in 2019. This does not take into account any escalation at this point, but it will take into a 5.6% escalation when we kind of start doing some of that simple math. And to Richard's point and to Tom's point, again, these are repair costs. So this just gives you a sense of those numbers there. So if we look at kind of a few different scenarios, again, we're just throwing out ideas, want to get a sense for if any of these make sense. But at the end of the day, we do want to walk away with a scenario or two to explore to move the work forward here. So this first scenario A, is replacement of Silverton Middle School. And again, simple math, if you look at the capacity and the projected capacity, and what we want to build for. This doesn't necessarily take into consideration growth past 2027, and that's another thing that we can talk about. But it just, we know that the 500 is a target for Silverton Middle School at 177 square feet per student. That gets you to about 88,500 square feet there, which is a little bit larger than what we've conveyed before. Just again, accommodating some, more restrooms and some of those extended learning spaces. And with that site and ODE cost, it's about 437 a square foot. And then that new building ends up being approximately 38, almost 39 million. When you start looking at that 5.6% and that project development cost there, your bottom line really is about 56 million, give or take. Again, these are swags at this moment. It's a budgeting exercise, but that kind of starts to give you a sense for if that $60 million is really a target, and if we get that 4 million eligibility, that's kind of the remaining balance. So again, simple math there. That's that first scenario. The second scenario is replacement of the Silverton Middle School, and then select improvements at each site. So again, you see that Silverton Middle School and get that sense for what that would be there. And then that's just saying, okay, we're going to take that repair cost and what BBL had done, and we're going to pick, approximately, give or take, 10% of that repair cost at each site and spread it out throughout the district. So You know, in some cases that gets you a roof and, you know, not a whole lot else. Other cases it might get you a classroom, but, you know, that kind of gives you sort of an equal distribution throughout the district wide. That starts to exceed the bond balance of 64 million by about 3.7 million or so there. So that's kind of a scenario B. A scenario C is, okay, well, let's take it again, look at keeping the gym that's already there, it's had improvements done, and then just doing brand new admin, brand new classrooms, brand new everything else, common space for the Silverton Middle School. That drops your square foot per student down to that 157, which gets you to about a 78,000 square foot addition, plus or minus. And you kind of start seeing how that dollar amount looks there. It's about 50 million is a projected budget there. Looking at scenario D, replacing Silverton Middle School classroom wings, keeping the gym, and then doing select improvements throughout the district at 15% select improvements. Again, not determining what those improvements are just yet, but kind of spreading some of the love there. That gets you to about 66, almost $67 million there for a budget. And then this is the, you know, if we wanted to look at replacement of 3 K8s, out of town K8s, Central Howell, Prattam, Evergreen. Again, simple math, looking at the capacity here, 291 plus 72 plus 94, and then multiplying that by 160 square foot per student, you end up being about $50 million for that replacement of those schools.
Jonah, isn't that 291 the wrong number though? Didn't we figure out that's more like 188?
You are correct. 180, yep.
Or
So,
1, I mean, you could put 190 or whatever, or, you know.
so how about we
Would
do
that
that?
be to replace each of those schools individually or to combine them?
That would be either or.
Okay, thank you.
So let's do this.
So while he's doing that, Eliza, you could essentially take the square footage. Now remember, we're at 30,000 feet. Take that square footage and put it into one building, it would be much bigger. Or you could just leave them individually.
So realistically, does building 3 separate structures on separate sites cost the same for the same square footage? You know, it seems like it would be definitely a higher cost proposition in the end.
Well, I think, Tom, you're absolutely right. But until we actually kind of do that evaluation, you really can't know. And I'm not, again, we want to stay at the 30,000 feet. So I agree, there would be some economies. And once we drill down on that, we could find a little bit of those. But the square footage is still square footage. You know, we could run into one of those sites that doesn't have sewer, and then the county won't let you run it without it on a septic tank anymore. But we ran into that. So a good point. I don't know that at this level, we really can't jump to that conclusion and reduce the overall, but I think there are some economies there.
Yeah, exactly. So to your point, Colin, that we updated that number just to make sure that we've got that right here. So that kind of brings the number down to about 38 million for that. And again, simple budgeting, that's really all we're talking about right now. Going on to another scenario. So replace Silverton Middle School and address the most critical schools. So again, if you remember that diagram that we shared earlier, it was really Central Howell and Robert Frost had the most needs outside of Silverton Middle School. That ends up being close to about 64.9. If you do plus or minus 30% repair at those schools. Now, again, that's just a budget number. So that 30% could be, you know, classroom addition at Robert Frost, you know, or, some select improvements, but it's just, for now, it's just a budgeting number to get kind of a sense of scale there. And then scenario G is, okay, again, looking at the repair cost based on the BBL analysis there. If we did 40% and did nothing else, no replacement of schools, just repaired, and kind of allocated the funds, equally at a 40% there based on those repairs, that gets you to about 64 million. And then, this one's just a wild one. It's not in the presentation, but it was kind of, two in-town K-8s that's building, if you're building from scratch, using those numbers. Again, this is just kind of us playing with different ideas. We're not suggesting this, but that kind of gives you a sense of what that number might be if you did something like that.
If you were to do that, I understand it. Is that going to cover like all the students in all 3 schools then?
Yeah, that's, again, Eliza, it's like real simple. Basically what we did was we said, we took the 350 and the 450, and then we added 500 and kind of distributed them. So we just overrid this category. Again, if it was there or elsewhere, it's just to kind of give some, some thoughts there. But, I think what, and we can run, another couple scenarios if we want to just kind of plug and play and do some of that. But I think what the overarching message of what I would encourage everyone to take away from this is, we probably really only have the capacity to take on one large project and maybe select improvements, or doing select improvements at all the sites type thing. I would imagine that replacement of 2 schools, or doing kind of a larger K-8 is probably not going to fall within the wheelhouse. So again, there's an assessment of needs on what is, understood. We want to project out, would love to project out past 10 years, but we're really kind of looking in the forefront right now on what's the immediate need. And I guess that's kind of what we might encourage you to consider and to review.
Well, and seeing that it's double the price to try to redevelop a whole system for our community, it's already less appealing. So good job. I would like to throw out that I think that G looks pretty plausible to me. I just like the idea of trying to really get this middle school into condition, but also taking care of many campuses. I think that would really help with bonding. And it's not too far exceeding that 64 million.
I guess the question I had for that one as a counter to that would be, knowing that Silverton Middle School is probably our biggest need, obviously, is that $12 million going to be sufficient of repairs to really get us to where we need to be 10, 15 years from now? And I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing that out as a counterpoint. We may have to look at spending a little more where the most need is, just because we have to, and then try to find other ways to look at how we can repair equitably across all the other different buildings. But my concern is 12 million going to really suffice enough at the high school, or excuse me, at the middle school.
And the other problem with that, you kind of follow through. It's kind of like when we had Eugene Field, and that took a lot of money from the district budget in order to keep that functional, which then takes money from other schools. So the question on that then is, the 12 million enough where the middle school still wouldn't drain too much money from the district coffers?
I just want to correct myself. I'm sorry, guys. I meant D, not G.
Oh.
Apologize for that. That's a complete confusing error on my tongue. I apologize.
Yeah.
That looks a little different. Thanks.
So Liza, what you're saying here is replacement, keeping the gym, you know, and kind of connecting to that with a new educational environment, and then doing select improvements at each site.
Yeah, and I think that we would want to probably look at a renovation to the tune of 38 or 34 million for the Silverton Middle School. Look at what options would be while still keeping the gym. You know, like give you a budget of that to see what a renovation at that cost might offer while keeping the gym.
Right.
And then giving some significant funding to the other schools. 15%.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to further that thought along, Eliza, you know, again, you know, what we'll do, and I'd like to, you know, have more discussion on this, and let's kind of vet through all of this and see what we like as a group. You know, I think we'll want to vote, you know, kind of and prioritize. But if this is the direction that we end up wanting to pursue, then we'll really dial into the middle school and what does that really look like, you know, when you tie into the gymnasium, you know, how does that impact the site? But then we'll also maybe kind of start, you know, we will start looking at the other sites and have some suggested modifications to those. And that 15% may be a new classroom in one case, you know, but it may be a roof somewhere else. We'll assess that based on kind of what we know now and what those schools have expressed in their interest.
Can I ask one clarifying question too on that? When it says on that scenario D, replace Silverton Middle School classroom wings and keep the gym, does that mean take out the old Schlater section, everything's gone, and then just replace around the gym, correct?
Yeah, that's it. That's the idea.
And ditch the portables, of course. Yes.
Yeah, and it would be a development. And again, it's a budget. You understood there's going to be, you know, cost. I know that you guys have gotten, you know, I think it was $800,000 kind of a few years ago was the number that was, correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren, but that was kind of the number for demolition of Schlater at that time. But yeah, that we would want to factor all of that in and redevelop that site, Aaron. Yeah.
So I have a question on kind of that idea, and like we were talking about with Jackie earlier about where are we going to put people during that. And so obviously you're going to have to, I mean, would it up the cost a ton if you end up almost, don't freak out, nobody freak out about me saying the word phases, because I know we have the freak out from the high school, but I'm not talking like a 5-year different phase, but is there, you know, ways that you could maybe tear down the old Schlater part, reconstruct 2-part, you know, 2 floors there, get that done, then add on maybe where the wings are and tear the wings out later so that you can still use the wing. I mean, I know we have issues with electrical and plumbing and some of that, but I mean, those are all things that we're going to have to spend a lot of meetings really drilling down in to try to figure out. But in the sake of time, I mean, is that going to take us a year of once a month meetings to figure out? You know, I mean,
No, Colin, it won't take that long, to be honest. If that was a direction that we wanted to move as a group, we would come to you with a few scenarios on how that might work, and we would vet those out, and we would refine those scenarios, and we would within 2 to 3 meetings we would have that kind of idea.
So last year I was up at, I don't know which Portland high school it was, but one of them, I want to say Milwaukee, but I don't think that's right. But somewhere up there, their entire football field was modular classrooms right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So okay, we're going to pound our chest a little bit. We did a similar sized high school at Gresham, and students stayed on campus, and they replaced 90% of the school. They kept a 2002 edition that was still in good condition. So this is the fun part. We can figure out if everybody says this is the way we want to go, let's see how this plays out, then we can start looking at those opportunities of, okay, if the Schlater goes, kids can stay in the portables for 1 year, and we can use this part, and we can use this part, and then we build this part, and we build it up, and then over the summer, they move into the new building, and then we take care of the rest. That's how they did Gresham High School, because we think it's a terrible option, the portable farm on their football field.
And that was my question is there a place where you can rent those, or do you have to purchase them, or what, maybe that high school is about to open, they can give us a screaming deal on theirs when they want their football field back or something?
Yes, you can actually, I think, how many are at Woodburn right now? I think they have like 5 or 6 available. You can have them for $1 a piece.
Yeah.
It's more than that.
Okay. So yes, that is always an option. You could park more portables, but again, the cost, anyway, I can't express enough. What we're talking about is going from repairing school costs to partial replacement and a reconfiguration of a learning environment that is much more conducive to the way you want to teach and learn now. And so, but until we decide that that's where we want to invest the effort in planning, then we shouldn't do that until we kind of know, okay, well, what are we going to do elsewhere? Are those in part of it? So we have a lot of confidence. I mean, again, I apologize for referencing Gresham High School, but we theorized it as 2 phases when we started into the project.
Yeah. And Richard's not to toot Richard's horn, but he's a master at kind of helping configure that phasing where it works. So you're not moving out into portables, you're moving into permanent space. And so if that's a 2 to 3 year construction process, then so be it. We're doing it up north. We're doing it in Astoria. We're doing it in Kalama. We may look at, that's weird. We may look at, even, is there a spot on that site that we can build totally separate? Obviously, if we're going to connect into the gym, that doesn't make sense. But if we were to replace the middle school in total, that would open up opportunities to maybe look at an alternative portion of that site, because it is a pretty expansive site.
How much fun? I was going to ask, how much fun would it be for us to show you 5 different configurations, a way that we could rebuild parts of that high school, of the middle school, using the gym?
I'd like to see that. It seems to me that there's a significant political impact with respect to the gym, because I believe the district spent quite a bit of money on that gym once when the middle school was formed to reinforce those concrete block walls, and I'm not sure what else they did. And for us to consider or saying we'd like to tear it down, I don't think that's a good option at all. I would strongly support keeping that building around it, and then I like the idea of some scenarios on the Schlater Street campus. The 2 wings, the west and the east wing, even though they're old, they can blend in, and maybe that's a possibility as well. I think we should look at that, not necessarily deciding to rip those out as well.
I was curious on that Gresham construction. Do you have a sense of, I realize that to completely flatten the whole place and rebuild would have displaced students and cost a lot of money. I just was curious, how much did it alter the cost per square foot to do the stepwise construction? Do you have a sense of that?
Yes, and it not in dollars and cents, but in the school district did look of temporarily relocating the entire student body, and they did look at a portable village like Milwaukee, and they actually saved money by not having to. It was I'm going from memory. It was like 3.5 years ago. It was like a $5 million cost to create the village. And that cost is related to bringing utility. It's not the buildings, it's utilities and everything that goes with it. And they did spend more money, but it wasn't as much as the $5 million hit for building temporarily relocating the student body.
Yeah.
So when I look at the sheet where you have replacement versus repair, it looks like the Schlater building to replace it is maybe $200,000 difference, which seems pretty minuscule. So to be able to redesign it, I'm curious about, because I think keeping the gym with the earthquake repair grant that we received for that, to redo that, doing that and looking at our option D here, keeping that's another $7 million savings. Why is the West Wing so much more expensive in its repair versus replacement cost versus the East Wing? Is that, I'm just seeing it's quite a bit different of a price jump, and don't know what that involves, I guess.
I can kind of speak to that. I'm sure Lauren could too. The West Wing is built in multiple steps, and I think it's 4 different construction phases with almost no continuity between them. And there's actually no hallway for some of the classrooms. It's an outdoor space. It's really kind of a hodgepodge, and if we want to have sort of an integrated structure, I would say that's a low benefit to salvaging that wing.
Yeah, would agree with that, Tom.
Yeah, most definitely. Said very well.
So,
which is really unfortunate since it's most closely located to the gym.
And let's not forget that, and Lauren brings it up, you just invested, the 1.6 million in upgrading your gym, and that was some grant funding that was available. So you've just invested a lot. So it has tremendous value for a number of reasons. But certainly you could work around it. I know, again, back to Gresham, they actually tore down a gym because the cost to repair what they had included a seismic upgrade that they hadn't had done yet. So it really made more sense to start over. So
yeah, and thanks for kicking us off on this scenario, Eliza. Just kind of looking at it, if from an outsider perspective, if I were to pick a scenario, this probably, I think, makes the most sense, because I think the messaging works really well. We're going to address the biggest need while capitalizing. It goes back to the guiding principles. We're going to capitalize on the investments the district has made thus far, i.e. the improvements to that gym. And, we're going to look at all the sites and determine what level of improvement happens at each site. I just think that's a good message, and I think it's a clear message. But
I have a question on that, though. Obviously, I know we're still just in the talking phase, but I think to go back to this, I'd like to know, and I was going to actually throw this out tonight, is could we maybe form a subcommittee? And I know we kind of did have it, and maybe it's still in place, and I just don't remember, but basically a group of people that just strictly is going to research and do talking about the bonds, what's available in the bonds. Because right here, you're talking about our max available we can get right now is 64.
No, it's not. Your max.
Well, your number you were kind of sticking around was around 64, right? In most of these scenarios, to give some.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what was the one, the pie in the sky one you had for max?
Well, to clarify a little bit on that, Colin, your max is closer to over 300 million.
Well, you had a number, but
I guess 125 million for the two schools. Yeah. Oh, plus a high school. I mean, plus the middle school would actually bring it to like 165 million.
I guess what I was looking at is like, I would like to know, so we do less for the middle school and more for everybody now at 64. That's what, a 20-year bond, right?
20 or
And
25, depending on what you want to do.
and we have the existing high school bond, which is how much left for 7 or 8 years?
I think you have 6 to 7 years, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And what's that number?
Let's see here.
Yes.
So it's highly customary for Carol Samuels to come to the school, to this committee, and kind of explain all those scenarios. You're spot on, Colin.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, to only repair one school that's our worst school, not back for something that's going to last for 50 years, and doing a bond for 64, and obviously we haven't done down in the nuts and bolts, but if the nuts and bolts of going to all the other campuses is Band-Aids, if you went for a smaller bond for the middle school to get the middle school you're going to need for 50 years, and then look at and I'm just strictly talking hypotheticals, what happens then in 8 years when the high school bonds rolled off? Could you then get something that would keep the number somewhat static? And, you know, maybe it's not, so it's like, maybe it's 45 to 50 now. I'm just throwing out total random numbers, but then in 8 years when that's off, you can go for another one. And then our time, we're figuring out in the 8 years, then you have more money available to really look at Mark Twain, Butte Creek, Scotts Mills, what those campuses would need for another long haul for them. Because if you're spending 64 million for 20 years and it's only going to do minimal things to those campuses, you're not going to even sniff any more money for 20 years for those buildings, anything. I mean, you're not going to get another thing done if you're at a 64 for 20 years. So that's what the scenarios that we as this group kind of need to look at, all those different possibilities of what's, you know, what would go.
So I was just going to comment. I believe Jonah just popped it up on the screen there. It was a little early in the process here, but about a year ago, Carol came to this committee. I wasn't even at that meeting. January 14th, 2020, Carol Samuels from Piper Sandler, and did this presentation that is on Jonah's screen right now. I just put the link. It's linked on our website in the long range facility planning section of our website, but the link is in the chat right now. This is something that they do all the time, and she would be able to come and do a fresh presentation with fresh numbers whenever this committee is ready to take a look at that. But that's the basis for which Joan is using the $60 million figure right now. But basically, the district bonding capacity is per measure or law, Oregon law, it's 7.95% of Measure 5 real market value. So the district's bonding limit, don't laugh, is $243 million. That's obviously not a number we would be looking at. But just to put it in perspective, the new high school bond in 2007, the original issue was $47,500,000. As of June 30th, 2020, our outstanding general obligation debt was $26,300,000, and you're correct, Colin, it does last through 2027. So these different slides that Jonah is going through here now are different scenarios about the way the debt could be structured, and it could be centered around, you know, cost per thousand, keeping it level, having it fall off, all of that. And Carol does such a great job of explaining that. But you know, if you didn't see that presentation, you know, take a look through those slides. You can look through it in 10 or 15 minutes, but it provides a lot of valuable information and a lot of comparative data to other districts about where they're at with their bonds and cost per thousand and that type of thing. So that's kind of, I think, I'm not sure who suggested the 60 million. I think that was just a number that was thrown out there for Carol to use in that presentation at that time. The other thing that's nice to remember to highlight is back in 2007 there was no significant state help in terms of facilities, and now they have what's called, well, there was the small supplemental grant for furnishings and computers and that type of thing, but now they have what's called the Awesome Grant. And so for 2019-21, we would be eligible for $4 million. Now, obviously, our bond effort won't happen until 21, 23 or beyond. Who knows what this recommendation will be and what the board will decide. But I believe this program is slated to continue into the next biennium. So I'm not sure if that number would be the same or if it might be a little bit more.
Well, I was actually going to ask that.
That's like a matching grant. So that's where the 64 million is coming from in this scenario. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that there's some good information on Carol's presentation, and that could easily be updated. One last thing is, since Carol's presentation last January, we were able to take advantage of the great treasury rates, and everything fell into line. This last September, we were able to refinance the general obligation bond and save $1.3 million in interest costs over the last 7 years of this bond. So Carol's presentation doesn't reflect that.
And I'd written down to ask a note on that awesome grant for later on, but with the changing in the biennium and COVID and all of that, and the history of that, awesome being around, is there any chance that that's going to drop a lot in the next biennium? If there's, or what's your guys' kind of projection on that? Do you think it'll stay around the same, or if we don't do it now, are we going to end up only getting 2 million later? I'm just curious on that, if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's always possible that it could go down. Right now, all we've been given is the governor's recommended budget, and I don't remember where this part of her budget, where that came in at. We're waiting. The next step is the co-chair's budget, which will be coming here within the next 30 days or less, and that's kind of usually what the Legislative Assembly works off of. So I'll do some digging and see what the governor's budget had for that. It's still a relatively new program, so I think the state was really committed to it. But with that being said, if the economy were to turn south again and the next quarterly economic forecast or two were to come in poorly, then that could be a program that they look at to reduce, like a lot of other programs that they look at. So it's hard to say. We wouldn't be eligible to get, we obviously won't be moving forward with anything in this biennium anyway. So we're really kind of dependent on what the allocation might be for 21, 23 and beyond, since we're just about to the end of the biennium anyway.
Yeah, I know it's not really the way taxes work out, but I did a little bit of number crunching, and I estimate that if we were to float a $60 million bond, another way of looking at it would be about $150 for every man, woman, and child per year for 20 years. I realize that people with property would pay a higher percentage and people without would not, but I just thought it was an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry for cutting on you there, Jonah, but thanks for popping that up on the screen. I just thought it was good to bring that back into, just so that people know it's out there. And certainly if and when the time comes, we could certainly ask Carol to come back and do a 60-minute presentation, and all these slides would be updated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to get to that point, you really have to kind of determine a scenario and kind of a direction that you want to go to get the most accurate information.
Right.
So that's kind of the point of tonight, is really the big point of tonight is let's solidify around a direction that we can start exploring, so that we can start getting some more of that definitive information, Colin, that we want to get and need for this process.
That you guys should go ahead and use that D-type recipe where you're talking about replacing the middle school and then finding real life needs at each of those schools that would equate to approximately 15% per thing. I think that that's going to get us our best marketability for this bond. I mean, I don't, otherwise you're talking about making a $35 million bond to do the middle school, and then passing another bond again in a few years. And we've already had such a very difficult time trying to come to some kind of unity on even whether we would pass a bond or not.
Eliza, I agree with you. I like this model because again, it puts in that what's in it for me to every community, every school community. And I think in order to,
has to be limited at 64 million. It could be a real number, like it would just be a starting point, right?
I agree with you. And I think but it shows the what's in it for me. So everybody has some buy-in here. And I think when we spell that out, I think all of us have kind of got on board early on in this committee that we're going to have to do that in order to pass this bond, even though the biggest portion of it is going to the middle school. Each community, each school community is going to feel like they're going to have to get something out of this. I think we also need to look at the deep dive that, okay, we start with that 15, but maybe it either increases per school if we really need it, or it moves around that, yes, we're shooting for 15, but maybe because of need, Prattham gets 17 and Evergreen gets 22 and Silvercrest only needs 9.5. You know what I mean? But I like this, but I don't think we need to limit ourselves to 15% until we know the needs.
I agree. And that might need to include actually expanding some of the in-town space at Robert Frost or Mark Twain.
Good point.
If we go down that route, we're going to be very specific on the needs of each of those schools. And it has to be real needs, not wants, such as a roof that's at the end of life and those type of things.
Well,
we need to be able to explain
all
that.
detailed in the same construction report that they're basing their repair analysis costs from.
Yeah, that report, there's a lot of nice things to do, not actual needs, though.
Yeah,
well, that's why you would find your needs, right? Instead of making all the repairs. The intention would be to find the most urgent and also appealing to that school community needs for each of those schools. And it doesn't have to be strictly equal between those buildings, but there's no question we need a middle school. And I don't see enough unity in our district to be able to just bond on a middle school alone without doing something for all the schools.
And I think there's so many other critical needs at other places that we're going to have to address those now as well.
And I would like to also say that I was going to bring up tonight, after watching the process of the K-5 and the use of the 5 maps program that they used, to look at each of those 2 K-5 schools in town, look at the demographics, look at the amount of intra and inter-district transfers and what the numbers and populations are like. I think we should do that for every school in our district right now and look at what the enrollment is versus the capacity plus the demographics there. How many of those are actually in the district or transferring inter-district or intra-district? Wally brought it up earlier on the chat that Pratham's fine because the capacity includes out-of-district transfers. Well, we've already kind of said, and the district has said, they're not going to kick out-of-district transfers out. We might limit some from coming in, but those families might already have people that are already in the family. That family's grandfathered in. So that number is there for maybe 10 or 15 more years. So those things I was going to suggest, I think we get a subcommittee to kind of start talking, like Steve was maybe meeting with that gal about the bond, what options are available with the bond. And then I think the rest of this group, we should, my suggestion was going to be pick a school each night that we have a meeting and sit down and really drill into that school, the nuts and bolts of that school, what the needs versus the wants, what's the expansion capacity, what's the long-term viability, and all those things of each campus, and come up with a plan of each campus to really look at ultimately what's the most responsible for the taxpayers too. If it's a needed repair but on a something that is not viable anymore, then that we need to talk about all those things for 10 to 15 to 20 years, because right now we really have nothing past this year. We have no plan.
Perhaps that could be done in the form of subcommittees for each building, and then brought to this meeting group, because I mean, this group needs to progress toward.
Right. My only concern
we can't
with that,
slow down and do 13 meetings just reviewing buildings.
well, but really this committee needs to keep going. I mean, we need to keep going to keep this going. My concern is when you start talking about subcommittees per each school, then we're going back to just my campus versus your campus versus this campus, where we need to really be doing this as a district. We're all taxpayers in the exact same district, and we need to look at the needs of all the schools, everything. And
I hear that. I just think that maybe it could be a subcommittee that includes people from multiple schools. It doesn't have to be just a building alone subcommittee. But I think we should be like piecing out some of this stuff and coming to these meetings with a little more input from all of us.
Yeah. And we started vetting that out at the schools. Again, it goes back to the needs versus the wants, but really there's a lot of parallel there on some of those items. So, you know, an extra classroom here is both a need and a want in some cases. So we'll go through and vet all of that information based on kind of the educational adequacies and what we've learned thus far. And we'll vet that out with, you know, with the schools and the principals, you know, as we move through. I'll be honest, Colin, I don't agree with the approach of slowing down and having more meetings, because I think what we heard loud and clear last time was that we're not progressing, we're not getting any, you know, we're not getting any definitive direction.
No, and Jonah, I'm by no means saying slow down at all. Honestly, I'd love to meet every 2 weeks. Honestly, I would. Honestly, I'd like to meet every week on this because I think this is a very important issue. I think once a month is too slow. I do, honestly. I think in the nature of the bond, we've got to get ripping on a bond like now, because the construction costs are going up. Everything's going to keep going up. Exactly. And if we don't get something going now, I think the idea of going through every one of these campuses and I just think we need to, maybe what Eliza's saying is somewhat true in dividing and conquering a little bit, you know, but like, we got to get cracking. I'll tell you, I was telling somebody today, this started in September of 18 when I emailed Andy Belando about getting on the facility board. It went the entire year that year to form the committee. Then Andy left. Then we had all of last year where we I call it the year of Paul. Things, you know, and then now we're again another year. I mean, I've been wanting to do these things for like 2.5, 3 years now. Like, we're just, I totally the opposite. I don't want to slow things down. I want to figure out a way to speed it up for everything. Most importantly, a bond.
I'd like to mention something that I recall coming up from various sources the last 3 meetings, is that actually since the beginning of last year, scattering our bond over too many projects is going to almost certainly cause a failure. Choose 1 or 2 primary areas of interest and focus on that and give people something they can clearly hang on to. There are some districts have passed bonds over multiple buildings, but for the most part, it's not likely to succeed. It's got a history of failure.
You know, Tom, I'll be honest, this is my experience, this is our experience, your bonds are more likely to pass if you get the kind of, you know, spread it out a little bit more, and there's a clear message, to Wally's point, at what you're providing at each site. I just, you know, to throw out anecdotal information that isn't necessarily true on that end, you know, the last 2 bonds that have been successful, we did that. You know, virtually every bond measure that we've helped with, that's been a recipe. Now, every community is not the same, and so I'm not trying to say Silver Falls is the same as, you know, Astoria, or is the same as Kalama or other districts that we've worked with, but you know, at the end of the day, this is your guys' bond. This is your long range facility planning process, and all I can do is offer kind of input based on our experience, and help facilitate that along. But I don't know that I personally don't agree with that assessment.
How specific must you be in the bond issue as to where the funds go and for what purpose?
districts that are often successful they do have a targeted sort of, if you will, big item, big need, or 2 or 3, depending on kind of bonding capacity. And a lot of districts will say, we're going to spend all, the remainder of the money doing, roofs, and doing safety and security improvements and doing, those kinds of things. That's a level of specificity that we see often in successful bonds. Sometimes if you get too specific, too dialed in and exactly what you're going to do, it just opens up the opportunity to pick it apart. And so, I mean, I've, and again, this is anecdotal, so I could be off base and totally wrong, but what I've heard, anecdotally for this, Silverton Middle School before, and a potential reason why it failed is because we said we were going to do modular construction, and people thought we were going to do modulars. So sometimes when you get too specific, it actually is counter to, you have to be specific enough to have a good message and to make, people happy with what you're doing. But if you get way too specific, then you're just opening yourself. The bond language has got to be general enough to cover, kind of all the needs. So
yeah. To Jonah's point, the bond title is one, it gives you the latitude, but the plan you present to the community, Ray, has to be pretty specific, or it has to be enough that everybody knows kind of what they're going to get. So it's a nice balance, and that's where Jonah's going. Is that you want to define enough that everybody can grasp onto something, but you want to leave some latitude such that you can actually have the flexibility to do it all. And so the bond title is the least of your worries because it's written pretty general, but what you communicate to your community is very important. And there's a whole bond strategy that's written around conveying that message. And it might be like the portables is an unfortunate story, but really you got to make sure that everybody understands exactly what they're going to get in terms of as a school district. And that should have been taken care of, that it's not a portable building.
Yeah, and a very effective message for a lot of districts is warm, safe, and dry. I mean, taking your, your biggest need, taking care of that, and repairing, doing basic repair throughout the site. Now, again, is that the right solution for Silver Falls? You guys will have to tell us that. But we would like to walk away tonight with a direction on kind of how to proceed. And we will prioritize and ask for everybody to vote on a scenario. So if there's not scenarios that we want to get on the docket, we should probably get those on as well and then vote on those. That would be my suggestion, because we can work through the details and the level of specificity at each site once we have a general direction on where to go.
Hey, Jonah, when you're talking like in the past, your experience in the past is you got to have a little bit for everybody to get something to get a bond behind. I'm just curious, in your guys' time with districts passing bonds, have you ever seen a district, or what's the highest number you've seen a district pass a bond for the amount of campuses? You know what I mean? Like, is it typical to be doing all this for 11 different buildings, or is it usually 5? Is it usually 4? Like, what's the success rate there? And that's where I'm wondering about this. Like, the 15% seems really little to really get the needs at some of these schools. And then, like somebody brought up, well, maybe one school gets 15, one school gets 25, one school gets 9. That school finds out they're only getting 9. They're not going to vote. Yeah. They're going to, so I'm just curious, like, what's the normal number when you're doing this that you usually do?
Yeah. So, hey, Jonah, there's the 2 examples that I wanted to highlight. Or one are your neighbors, 12 miles to the north. All of their schools got addressed. The high school needed the most work. They reconfigured their middle school, and they only have, 3 schools. But their elementary school, which is, their grade school, is relatively new. They got a reconfigured parking lot, because the parking, if you've ever been up there, parking drop off of kids is a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So they touched every single school, and their bond was like 10 or I think it was $12 million. The cost to the community, it's a small community, as you know, was over $3 a thousand of assessed, which is a pretty high number. So they got that passed through having something for everybody. Every student is impacted. That's 3 schools. Gresham Barlow is 22 schools. Every single one was touched, not at the same level. So to your point, I believe it was Colin, to your point, some schools were replaced. Some schools got wings added for capacity. It was a myriad of improvements. But those improvements, I got one more, a myriad of those improvements, but they all got up to the same standard of service to their kids. The last one that I wanted to mention is Woodburn. Woodburn, all 4 of their elementary schools, Heritage, Nellie Muir, and Lincoln all had to be brought up to a level comparable with Washington. So all 4 of their elementary schools have different budgets. It's a 5, it's a 10, and it's a $2 million projects. And now they're all comparable, but they're not the same value. So, and they didn't touch that. They had a little bit of CTE at the high school. This is still Woodburn. A little bit of work at their high school, and a little bit of work at their middle school. So we don't see that it has to be the same number, but it has to have the same value to that community.
Well, and I'd say you brought up some points that I would also clarify those. When you look at Gresham Barlow, what's the population of that voting? You know what I mean? And so when you compare us to Mount Woodburn, I could get that a little better, but even then, Woodburn's higher population, I believe, than we are. I'm talking similar population. When you're talking about our voting pool, to a similar project like this. I mean, Beaverton, they can pass a $1 billion bond, but I'm just saying for our area and our population, what's similar?
Well, the Woodburn's going to be the best example, but even the reason I brought up Gresham is they hadn't passed a bond since 2002.
Yeah.
Jonah and Richard, I just wanted to interject.
Thank you.
I don't want to give, I'm not technically part of the committee, I'm just district support, but just from what I've seen in our business officials community for, hearing things over the last 20 years, it does seem that more districts have success with these situations where more buildings are touched than not. It doesn't mean that it's equal. I mean, there's a lot of situations like ours where we're wanting to build a new school, but then we're getting some improvements to other schools. But I would have to agree with Aaron though that it doesn't need to be necessarily the same percentage applied to each school. I think Jonah just put that in there for simplicity's sake. All the homework's been done with our facilities assessment, which is why it took some extra time to get to long range facility planning, because we had to do the facilities assessment first. But and also to go back to Ray's comment about what's described in the bond statement, building a new middle school, and then with the other schools, again, it could be a sweeping deal for the rest of the schools that security enhancements are included, but for each school, it might be 1 or 2 big hitting options. Like I know for Victor Point, parking situation would be a big one, just as an example. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is 4 of these schools have had $1.5 to $1.8 million seismic retrofits already. So those locations already have a head start. Scotts Mills, Butte Creek, Victor Point, and Mark Twain. Not saying that they don't have other needs. Absolutely they do. But within those seismic projects, we were able, with the walls open, improve technology infrastructure and other things, energy efficiency, and those types of things. So it might mean that one school ends up with 5 or 8%, and another one ends up with 20%. So I mean, there's just a lot of different things to to take into account with that.
Yeah.
And I think too, Steve, on that note, I know Eliza, you put it in the chat as well about, it's more of, we're looking at this as kind of an estimate. And then that maybe give us a dollar figure, and then we start playing around with the dollar figures. And I think when we go to the communities and we go to the public, it's going to be in dollars. And for those dollars, Prattam, you're getting this. Evergreen, this is what we're thinking about touching. Scotts Mills, this is what we're touching here. That's how we'll finally present it. But I think the 15% is showing it's not about percentage. It's about, well, let's start there. Let's get us a figure, and then we kind of back into the numbers. Now that might be tweaked a little bit to Steve's point because of the seismic upgrades. We don't need to do this here, but we need to do a little bit extra here because Evergreen's roof is shot and it needs to go, right? So I think when we go to the public, it'll be in dollars. And I think that was a great point that Eliza brought up in the chat.
Yeah, Aaron, Steve, you couldn't have said it any better. I mean, we would never communicate a percentage. That is literally just for us to kind of get a sense for it. And I don't know that schools are going to say, well, that school got a bigger parking lot than my parking lot or something like that. They're going to see what's in front of them, I think, and say, wow, I really need those parking improvements, or we really need that roof, or we need that classroom, and that's what they're going to see. And so
that's the route we go down. Then I guess the question comes back to what Eliza said: are we going to do subcommittees to then? Are we as this whole committee going to look at every school and say, what are the needs, what are the wants, and figure that out? And how much longer is that going to take us? Or what's your suggestion for that?
Part of my suggestion, Colin, is that we're going to work with Lauren, to be honest, because if we're going to take that approach and have an understanding of those facility needs based on that, and just based on what Lauren and the different schools know, that's gonna feed into it a little bit. But also we'll communicate with those schools, kind of what those thoughts are, and get an understanding of what they would like, I think. But at the end of the day, a big part of it, if we do this, a big part of it's going to be facility needs, I think.
I think we should focus primarily on the possibilities for the middle schools. It was suggested for the architects to come back with 3, 4, or 5 different scenarios. And once the committee can kind of home in on that particular issue, then it would be more, maybe easier, maybe not, but to talk about and think about the other schools.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if there's and we can have more discussion. If there's no more discussion, do we want to put it to a vote, for the different scenarios, and kind of get a sense for where everybody's landing and what they think? What do we think about that? So we can.
I'd like to know if we're going to, what our timeline is to vote. I mean, if we're going to do that, then, and we say, if you go back, what was the one everybody liked D so far? Mm-hmm. If you go back to D, that was what percentage again? I mean, I'm not, what was the amount for the middle school on D?
It's 34,351,000. And it would be 15% of the repair costs estimated for the every other building.
And that's at 64 million. So I guess I would like to know, out of 64 million bond and 34 million, how soon can you guys tell us what that's going to get us at Schlater? What is that going to get for a 50-year middle school at Schlater?
Well, Colin, what we would do is we would look at a floor plan situation and kind of how that would organize. And so that's right. What we come back with.
So how soon? I mean, is that a month-long process? Is that 3 months? Like,
that would be our next meeting, is what we would, we would come with some ideas of what to do there.
So in a month, do you think you could have that?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have ideas and concepts, and it's a process. We'll vet it out at the next meeting, and you guys will poke holes in it and tell us, you know, what's good about it, what's not good about it, which options you like, which options you don't like, and we'll continue to refine. But if we don't draw a line in the sand and start, you know, something, then we're not going to get anywhere.
I think the point of that would be that what we're asking you to do, if we said forward with D, would be to give us a couple designs that include a new building, essentially a renovation, but it includes the existing gym. So we're not building a whole new gym, but you might be able to actually keep campus operating while you did that, because the gym would be the only thing that we're planning to keep. And then figure out what would be an estimated item of value to each building for approximately 15%, give or take, for those other buildings. Would you be able to do that by next month?
Yeah, I mean, we could have scenarios to look at. Absolutely. Yeah, and we'd get together with Lauren to kind of and talk about some of those facility needs.
And like keeping it at approximately 64 million, but then get with some wiggle room according to the actual needs, maybe.
So yeah, we did ask this question back when we were talking to the staff, and so I'm assuming my colleague is thinking about those questions. And actually, my trip to all the schools with Lauren, we talked about some things that the school district would really, what would resonate with the schools individually. What do they really want? Then when we talked during the educational adequacy, we got some, you know, what's on their top 3 wish list. So we're seeing that in a combination with what are their basic needs would be the start of a developing of a plan. So the way why the 1 month time frame works good for us is because the first thing we do after this meeting or the next couple of days is debrief. What did we learn? And we put it together and kind of like, okay, here's the assignments. Then it takes time for us to develop those concepts. Anyway, the long story short, then we take a week just to prepare to come to the meeting. So that gives us enough time to give you a first look. And it's great. We're totally open to criticism, comments, and that's the start of kind of building this towards something that responds to this committee. And if we can respond to the committee, then I think we got a shot with the rest of the community.
Yeah, I personally, I like the D approach and what, you know, Eliza and Colin had shared. Just, you know, if we can kind of get a rough estimate with the granularity about what that budget level would get each facility, and, you know, obviously some ideas for the middle school, I think that would be a great starting point to move us forward. I'm not hearing a lot of opposition. Again, we have some more time here for the floor, but I'm not hearing a lot of opposition to that, at least that overarching approach of scenario D.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need to heavily rely on Lauren on identifying the needs at each school when we start talking about the rest of them, but the big focus should be on the middle school and keeping the gym and keeping the site operational while construction going on.
Great.
Can do.
Great. So what I might suggest, just to put a bow around it, is, and we're open for more discussion as well, but Maddie, if I know that you have kind of the voting system set up, if we want to take a look at that and just have everybody vote on that. And I've got here the scenarios, if you can see on my screen, what those scenarios are. So, you know, if everybody can kind of give their top 3, and then we'll get an aggregate and see what the highest number is.
Can you email those? Like, can we flip through them again? Like, I just feel like we only saw them real quick once.
Absolutely. So, so A is replacement of Silverton Middle School, and that's just replace the middle school, nothing else. B is replace Silverton Middle School and select improvements at every site. So this again still has that same approach, but this is saying that we're tearing down the gym possibly and then replacing the gym. So It's still, you still get improvements at the site, but this may look at a different location for the middle school, possibly. C is replace the middle school classroom wings and keep the gym with no improvements at the other sites. D is the one we've been talking about, select improvements at the site. E is replacement of 3 K8s. F is replace Silverton Middle and address the most critical needs. So again, remember that diagram? We saw the most critical needs were at Central Howell and Robert Frost based on the data. And then full replacement of Silverton Middle.
Can I ask a question on that one real quick? I forgot, sorry, back on the Robert Frost. What was that because of educational inequity changes? Is that what was the need there?
It was a combination of some of those items. So let's see here. Let's take a look real quick. So Robert Frost was capacity was okay. But it was, I mean, it's bordering on orange, to be honest. Facility needs, but it was the educational adequacy based on what we heard from the teachers and staff and you know, everybody we interviewed at that school.
And we don't have any necessarily meat and bones of what that is to change that. That's just a number to remodel some classroom. I mean, we don't know what that really, that's just based off the survey of, or that was maybe making like a newer home or special ed sped room or something.
I mean, it runs a gambit between, you know, you've got pie-shaped classrooms that don't really function quite well for, you know, acoustics and just the organization on down to restrooms to, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, they scored it low using those 40 data points. So that was kind of that there, Colin. And you know, there may be an option here where, you know, an option, I don't know, J or I, where we say that you do the Silverton Middle School replacement similar to D, and then put more percentage at Robert Frost and Central Howell. That could be a scenario, but then that would be no improvements at the other site. So that could be a variation of F. G is repairs at all the sites, kind of some, I mean, again, we wouldn't use percentages, but, you know, we'd identify needs at all the sites. But it would, you know, quite candidly, Silverton Middle School is always going to be, you know, a challenge if we go that route. And then H was the 2 in-town K8s. Again, this was just kind of us messing around and seeing, but that's a pretty high number. So, and this kind of summarizes those here.
Is there any way you could email that spreadsheet out to us to look at after the meeting?
Yeah, you have it in the presentation.
Oh, you know what?
I flipped through the
H, I, and J is not in the presentation.
Oh, I flipped through the, is that in part of that PDF that Debbie sent out?
Yeah. Yeah, H is not in there, but I and J there wasn't anything in those ones.
Oh, I just flipped through and I didn't see it, so I thought I was missing it. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to be clear, I'll send you guys an updated presentation that clarifies some of those errors that I had earlier in the presentation. And
when we're talking the 38 million new building, that I thought Richard had said it was closer to 49. I thought the 38 was like the bare bones renovation number.
So 38, so there's, and Richard, feel free to clarify on this end, but the 38 here is saying a replacement, a total replacement, not replacing the square footage you have now, replacing it based on the student count. So that's why that's different.
Okay.
So obviously we wouldn't build a school as large as what you have now because it's too large with the Schlater campus there.
Yeah, that was 111,000. So that explains the difference. Yeah. So for comparison to the state, it's how much square footage compared to how much replacement. So instead of
You're-
111,000, it's 88,000.
Okay, so what you're ultimately saying is we could potentially build a 2-story structure where the existing Schlater condemned part is and not need the wings anymore. And that drops your square footage a little bit because you're not using all that extra wing space.
Yeah, the square footage is the same, but the footprint, yes.
Okay,
The footprint, yep.
I got you. Okay.
Mhm. So I don't know if everybody sees I know it popped up on my screen, kind of the poll there. And really it's kind of like pick your top 3. And I believe, Maddie, that will aggregate.
So Jonah, why don't you go back to the summary page just as a reminder?
Yeah.
That would work for me if I were voting.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't know if there we go. Yep. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
While folks are voting, I wanted to go ahead and say thank you for sending the slideshow ahead, because I was able to print these pages, and it does help me get a better sense of what's going on with the numbers, to be able to physically write on them and, witness them while we talk about that. So thank you for getting that out ahead of the meeting.
Absolutely, Eliza. And, I'm glad we were able to get those out too. It's always a challenge because there's just a lot to talk through, and you can look at it in a variety of different ways. So that's why we wanted the opportunity to explain it to you. And so I'm glad that you found that useful.
Yeah, we were even revising it as late as like 1 o'clock today. So we want to make it as accurate as possible. So yeah, it's
There's a lot of what ifs. I mean, that's why it's nice to be grounding into something a little more obtainable.
yeah. So as we talk, I like the criteria that we outlined as to what we're going to do. Not only are we going to talk about layouts, we're going to talk about how you phase it, keeping the students on campus. So, I mean, I think that's great. And then the list of items for each of the schools and the associated budget, using the 15% as kind of a starting point.
I saw the 291 figure for Central Howell at least 3 places. So that's one you want to go through and check every page.
Yeah, and we'll get that updated.
Thanks, Ray. Yep.
It's in that. Yep, thanks, Ray. Okay, so while everybody's voting there, I thought maybe we can kind of go around and let's again do what we did last time. Like I said, for us, it was valuable to hear everybody's feedback in the end, regardless of how what that is. So let's go ahead and start with you, Ray. Any kind of takeaways? What'd you learn? Any concerns? As we move forward.
I thought it was a good discussion. Let's see. One point that I have not heard that may be of interest at some point in the discussion with buildings is the availability of the network service in the rural areas. So question in my mind is, would Central Howell, for example, have 180 Chromebooks all functioning at the same time? I think that may be an issue down the road for our district.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ray. And just real quick, there was a question about scenario I think, and we hadn't outlined a scenario there. We have up to H at this point. Great, thanks, Ray. Jackie, did you have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns?
Just, I think as we go forward, we should probably look at the area, and I'm not too sure how voting is tabulated, but knowing where our pockets of, I guess, interest, who should we sell this bond to more so than others. I see it's Marion and Clackamas that's going to be voting on this. Unfortunately, our out of district students and their families don't vote, nor do they pay for this bond. So that's kind of something to consider as we push this bond. You know, who are we pushing it to? We want to push it to the voters who are going to vote for it first off, and really figure that out. When I look at this total estimate budget, the one that we are talking about most is D. Is that a $67 million bond we're asking for there? Is that what I'm?
It's approximately a little over 60, because this would also figure in the 4 million. Awesome.
Oh, got you. Thank you. That's what I needed to see. I like 60. It's nice, and it's just a good number to go for. So I appreciate that clarification, because I was like, oh, that was a little higher. I don't know if that's going to go. So thank you.
Thank you. And Jackie, to clarify too on the tallying, this is after we're done going around the room here, that Maddie, if you could kind of let us know what are the highest ones and what the count is. Let's do that, and so we can put a bow around it. And Eliza, any comments, questions, concerns?
I think that you all know most of my opinion. I do want to say that, you know, originally when Paul set this up, he asked a few of us to lead subcommittees or whatever about communication. And I really appreciate Jackie's concern about communication. And I'm still interested in participating as much as you need me to in trying to reach out to community and encourage outreach beyond the school buildings too. That's up to you all, what you charge me with.
Great. Great, thanks, Eliza. Lauren, you're next.
All right. Yeah, I've been pretty quiet tonight, but like Steve said, you know, I'm really here. I work for you, the community, and you know, I'm just here as support in any way I can. As you know, we've got a lot more needs than we have ability to fund in this process, so it is going to be challenging to kind of get down to the bare necessities, especially when it comes to looking at these schools, depending on which scenario you go with, you know, how much money for each school. Yeah, some of the schools might not get everything that they want. So, yeah, but I appreciate all of you and all your work in this process. It's been great to see happening, and we definitely need it.
Thank you, Lauren. And to clarify on the question, there was a question in the chat about scenario H. Again, that was just basically saying replacement of essentially Robert Frost and, you know, and late at night, I'm like Mark Twain, and making those K8s, or Silverton Middle, make it a K. It's just, all it's saying is, you know.
Oh, I see. It's making them K. Okay, I was just confused if it was dealing with all 3 schools. Okay, it would be making 2 new K8 schools.
It would be two
okay.
schools, exactly. And again, that dollar amount's pretty high, but you know.
Right, that's why I was just like, does that include the middle school too? But I understand that now. I thought there was one that was like, here's the pipe dream if you did the middle school and the other schools that had a high dollar amount. I thought it was that one, but I guess that's not. I misunderstood that.
Yeah. Thanks, April. Melissa, what are your concerns, thoughts, comments?
I have a lot of concerns and thoughts. I don't know if I can get them all in a comment right now. I think I was the one at the last meeting that talked about the cost per student. And I think that what my concern is not just the cost per student of repairing or replacing, but also operating costs and what are we spending on these buildings, and how. I know that we're at a 10-year committee, but when you're talking about bonds that go 20, 30 years, it seems to me we want to think in those 20, 30 years, because it's going to be hard in another 10 years to come and get another bond. So if we're trying to think 20, 30 years, it seems to me we need to look at all of our buildings and decide which ones are really feasible to be around in 20, 30 years? And are we being fiscally responsible with those dollars? And is it equitable for all of our students? And so to me, I think there's a little bit more information that I would like to have.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, and the operating costs, I think that's something we'd have to get from, that's something that we wouldn't be privy to. We'd have to get that from Lauren or the district, or, not sure there.
And can I say also, I'm not saying that I don't think that we should have K-8 buildings. I think we should, we do, we need them. I think they're an important part of our district, but I want to be fiscally responsible about them. And to me, it might make more sense if you're having 3 or 4 or however many small K-8s that are only serving a small number of students, but they're costing us more. It might make more sense in that 20 to 30 years to think about replacing them into still keeping a small K-8, but making it more usable for today's standards.
Gotcha. Thanks, Melissa. Brett, did you have thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased towards the middle school, but I've never wanted it to be just about the middle school. I want to see other schools get what they need. And so I would lean towards stuff that we've been talking about tonight. And then just thinking back to the other bonds, just to be very clear and focused about our objective, and in how we communicate that, not down to the nitty gritty detail necessarily, but just very clear with the community of what we want to do. And then I was also happy to hear that Jackie was going to end her career at the middle school. So thanks for making that announcement on record, Jackie.
Thanks, Brett. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
No, I thought it was a real impactful meeting. I think everybody did a nice job of, kind of going through the scenarios. We're getting down to that spot now where we can have a plan going forward. And I'm glad we're kind of honing in on, okay, how do we take the next steps? What does the actual model look like? What does it actually look like that we're going to be, going towards next in some specificity, instead of kind of spinning like we've been in the last few meetings, which were valuable because much of the dialogue was needed. But to find that we're honing in on something is really, it's really good to see. And I think we also need to keep in mind something too here. I know we're all, really excited to try to get something concrete done in a timely fashion. We don't want to drag out. However, I think we need to be cognizant, again, of current situations with COVID, the economic situation that causes, and to be prudent with when we do go for a bond, that it's at the right time. If it means waiting 6 months or waiting, to a different election cycle, then I think we need to keep that in our minds. I also think we need to just be very, very cognizant of that. And if we do have to take a little extra time, I'm okay with that. That doesn't mean we drag, but I'm okay that we take a little extra time to be very deliberate, because I don't think we're going to get another chance at this. I think this is going to be something that we're not going to get another chance for, I would say 10 plus, maybe even 20 years if we mess this up. So I would say let's proceed with diligence and with caution and with good resolve to get something great done. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. Other Aaron.
I know, sorry, I forgot there was 2 Aarons. The one I would also just like to make sure that we make the absolute best decision for the middle school for the next 100 years, because clearly these buildings, we don't pass bonds often. So, whatever that means, if we're going to remodel it or fix it or whatever, that we're getting what we're going to need for the very long future. I also have a pretty big concern of making sure that everybody's on board, and it would be very disappointing to have us come up with a plan and then put it out in the public and have people that are working on this plan not support it. So I just want to make sure that, you know, if this is what, even if it's not, you know, what you're, maybe it's not the plan that you wanted or whatever, but that, you know, whatever the committee chooses, you back it, so that we can really sell it to all the communities. And, you know, also I think in general right now with everything that's going on with COVID, people are getting so stuck on all the different reasons that things can't happen. I'd love to keep it, let's find all the reasons that this will pass, or that, you know, we can make things happen. The other question I have, and this may be just, it's not, I don't need an answer, but just to throw it out there, when you start looking at specific buildings, because Mark Twain and Robert Frost are about to transition to K5s, your answers could be different in K5s than they were, you know, when you did the meetings last spring. So that might just be something, as you're kind of planning for what the buildings need, that might just be something to think about. Or we don't know what the staffs are going to look like yet. So I don't know that you could talk to them again, but just being aware that, you know, those buildings are about to change to different populations. So there may be some different needs.
Great. Aaron, thank you so much for articulating that consensus decision making. That's really, really important. And, you know, every time you work with a committee, anytime you work with a large group, you're never going to get 100%, you know, everybody getting what they want or get on board. But as long as we're all together when we come out of this, the message is going to be much stronger and much more able to pass. And that's a good note on Mark Twain and Robert Frost. That's something that we'll want to circle back on. Brandon.
So I think everybody, from what it sounded like, scenario D was a pretty popular option. And I agree with everyone saying that to get a bond passed in this community, everybody needs to be in on it. And my one concern with that, and I think Melissa was kind of touching on this, is that we don't just do it for the sake of getting everybody involved. Yes, everybody needs a piece, but I feel like in years down the road, this 11 schools in the district might come back to bite us. And if we just keep putting Band-Aids on all of them, that it might cause a problem that we will just have to keep dealing with. So if something like Central Howell can get, and I know the percentages weren't set in stone, obviously, but if the other schools got somewhere around like 3% to get a roof or whatever it is, and we focused on one of the other schools that we know we can make better going forward and possibly build on. I don't know. I know it's Pandora's box in this community to talk about shutting down schools or anything like that, but just having our eye to the future, knowing that these things are going to come up, and just like Colin said, the Band-Aids, I understand like safety, being warm, dry, all that, but so I don't know if I articulated that well, but that's kind of my concern. So what was the other option? It was like F. And I understand F doesn't touch all of the schools, but it does upgrade 3 of them really well. So mine would be a mix of D and F, where we're really upgrading while still giving people value on their bonds. And I don't know how possible that is, but that's what I would like to see. But as Aaron said, I'm gonna be on board with this no matter what. I'm not gonna, fight against it. The middle school is obviously the #1 priority. So yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you, Brandon. Wally.
Yeah, I think when we go out for bond, the scope needs to be clear and focused, and if we do some of the things in the other schools, they need to be things that can easily be justified and easily explained and understood. And also, when we talk about numbers, these are big numbers we're talking about. I think we need to, when we talk about these numbers, we need to talk about the cost to the taxpayer, because that's where it hits the road, where people can look at their own pocketbook and understand what it means to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Wally. April.
Let's see. I wanted to, of course, I agree that the middle school is our number one most imminent concern. But if we're looking at this committee as more than just getting a bond for the middle school, I know no one in our town ever wants to have the hard conversations about all of our rural schools, but I support our rural schools, but I think we have to start talking, if we're talking 20, 30 years, about bigger picture, what Melissa was saying, the cost of keeping all of these schools going. Is there a possibility of eliminating one or two or consolidating one or two? I don't know. I mean, if the committee is beyond just getting this bond and fixing the middle school, I think there's other things that we need to look at. But I also agree with the messaging about the bond. If we're going after a bond, our messaging has to be really clear, simple to understand, and very concise, because I think that's been a problem in the past with getting bonds through, is, you know, the community not really understanding what's going to happen with the money. So just to piggyback on a few points that have come up.
Great. Thank you, April. Sean.
There we go. So I kind of, like a few other people said, I kind of think like today was a good time, a good meeting. We've kind of like been building the launch pad. Now we're ready to actually start the launch sequence. That's kind of how I feel that I like seeing all the scenarios and the numbers. You know, as I look at them, which I think is kind of bubbling toward the top, scenario D makes the most sense, being a longtime community member here and attending, you know, Central Howell back in the day. If we do keep the gym at the middle school, I think that's going to tell the community that we're being responsible, because we've already put some money into the gym, but we're definitely going to take care of the parts that need it. I think that's really wise. The making sure that all the schools have something, that's important, because you're looking at 2 schools that are not in Marion County. So as I was looking at, well, the other 3 that are really needing it, well, they're Marion County. Okay, so then if I remember right, that's kind of what kind of sank the last bond we went for, was Clackamas County. It was kind of like the tipping point. It was close no matter what, but that kind of tipped us on the wrong side of it. So I think that's important, that we're looking at all of those items. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but I sure appreciate people and their comments. It helps us all really look and think this through.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Okay, let's see. Who do we got next? Shelley?
Hi. You know what? I'm an actual board member, so I'm just here to listen.
Okay.
And not respond. But thank you for asking.
Thank you, Shelley.
Uh-huh.
We got 2 Toms. Tom, let's go Tom B.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm like Shelley. I'm on the board. I think that this group is captured.
Did I lose audio?
I think we all did.
Oh,
I think we lost Tom. I can hear you guys.
okay.
If you come back, Tom.
Yeah. And let's see, who else do we have? Do we have other Tom? Tom Newton, did you leave, or are you still here?
Tom left a message that he had to leave.
Oh, okay. Who am I missing? Colin.
Hold on. All right. Sorry about that. You know, I'd like to echo and kind of put together everybody's thoughts a little bit, like with Aaron, Brandon, and Melissa and everybody, that I think it comes down to what's best for the taxpayers and the kids and the teachers. And I really do think that as much as it hurts to take off the Band-Aid, like I said, I think we need to really have some talks, and change is hard. You know, we went through the Eugene Field change. That was hard, but in the end, you know, everybody comes out on the backside fine, you know. And so I think we really do need to look at that focus, especially when you're looking at passing a bond in D and giving, you know, putting money towards a school that might be at capacity and already is full of a bunch of out of district transfers that aren't going to vote for our bond. I think that's a big issue. So I just think we really need to look at those things. And that's why I kind of brought up the 5 maps and looking at some of those scenarios and looking at all those schools. So that's kind of my 2 cents from tonight.
Gotcha. Thanks, Colin. Peter.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo some of the same things, the middle school, whether it's totally replaced or the gym salvaged, I mean, I would hope the decision would be to create the best long-term environment for the students. But obviously retaining the gym, I think it does have a big bonus, especially for marketing and nostalgia and just expressing that to the community that we're trying to save some funds. But the problem I just see is that when that 10-year planning horizon you mentioned, I mean, this is really a 20-year planning horizon, and I just don't see the 15%. I know it'll be allocated potentially different, meeting the needs to not have to write another bond. And so I just think that 15% is going to be way too low for a true long-term. This isn't really a long-term plan. It is kind of a Band-Aid, but it has to be a good one. And it has to be a really good one. And I don't think this is a good enough one with 15%. So that's just kind of my thought.
Gotcha. Thank you, Peter. And then finally, unless I'm missing somebody, and you guys tell me if you want to say anything, Scott, Steve, and Debbie.
Well, I'll just say that I've learned so much at each one of these meetings, and still being a relative newcomer, I think it's important that I stay in that role. But listening to the different scenarios, scenario D obviously makes a ton of sense to me. And what's even more important to me, though, in my head is when I'm thinking about what everybody's saying is the narrative we need to develop to get a capital improvement bond passed is something that I really need to get behind. Whatever the community decides that's going to be, whatever this group decides. So for me, it's just so valuable to sit and listen. And again, I wanted to thank the group because I got multiple texts just this evening about how thoughtful and deep the discussions are and respectful. And I just wanted to say I'm just really thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I just appreciate the comments. I learn a lot, and I think the discussion is great. I also just want to publicly thank Richard, Jonah, and their staff for all the hard work they do to get ready for the meeting and put these presentations together. They do a really good job, and really appreciate their efforts.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Alan, did I miss you?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'll just what Wally and Brett and those guys were talking about as far as details, not too deep, but making sure everybody knows what's going on. And something I remember back when all this committee stuff was starting is the majority of our voters are over 60. And so we need to make sure that when we do our details and what people are doing, that we're relating to those people that don't necessarily have kids in school anymore, so that we get their votes for whatever bond measure we decide to go after.
Great. Absolutely.
You got Ray's vote. he's dancing a jig. Wow.
I'm over 60 for sure.
Okay. So I believe I have poll information here. Let's see if I can pull this up here. Can you guys see that?
I just shared the results, Jonah.
Oh, did you? Okay, great. So it looks like D. So the top 3 our top one is D. And then is there a way that you could send this to us too, Maddie, and all the chat comments as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll download them and then email them to you. And then you're free to share them with whoever you want, Jonah.
Perfect. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Great.
What I appreciate about the results are that we have 3 clear options that we should investigate. We will to some level. B, D, and F. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And if there's nothing else, let's see here. Actually, let me get back to the presentation real quick, because I think what we were saying is our next meeting is potentially, and let's talk about that. And we will need, for this next one, we will need time to get ready for it. We were thinking possibly February 24th, which would be 4 weeks. Does that work for everybody? And Scott and Steve, how does that work with your boundary schedule and all that?
What was that date again, Jonah?
February 24th.
That, I believe that works.
Looks good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate all your hard work and sticking with us, and we'll get the updated presentation out to you. And have a good night. Thank you.